Welcome, friends. Part 2, number 13, 2023. I thought we might dip into a little more Frederick Sculthorpe, his adventures and excursion into the spirit world. He was starting out when we read before, and some of the lower planes and narrow-minded, ignorant activity. But there's lots of experiences on what he calls the brighter spheres. Here's a couple of interesting segments. The higher speed of thought and life on the bright planes compared with our set of ideas of time is hard to understand, but it is relative and only noticeable when comparisons are made. In the summer of 1957, I spent a week's holiday with my wife and spirit in one night. His wife, you recall, had been passed on for quite a number of years, and he'd interacted with her in short spells before. I had been projected and joined my wife in a place that I can only describe as a sylvan fairyland of trees and water. We were on the grassy banks of a placid stream overshadowed by trees. Shadows are hardly possible on this bright plane, but the beauty of light and shade was enhanced by the shafts of light from the brilliance overhead, which emphasized the fresh greenness of everything. A poet or writer could fill chapters with descriptions of the beauties of this idyllic scene and would still be incomplete. It certainly would. As always, there is a sensitivity to the spirit body which is infused by the vibrations of the sphere. As worry or distraction is a vibration of thought and happens to be a lower wavelength of thought, my feelings on this higher vibration of being was of extreme happiness and love, a general love of everything, so it seemed. Before we left this plane, I was impressed with the idea of 1 week, end quote, and it seemed as such, although there are no nights to mark the passing of days. We were transported, and then I saw we were hovering over an area on the Sinai side of the canal near Suez, called Shalufa. It was a place where I had some happy times bathing during the First World War. It's hard to imagine happy times bathing during the First World War, but I guess they took little breaks. I was glad to be able to show my wife one of my cushy spots during the war and not a battlefield. We rose high and with a panorama of desert beneath us, I said to my wife, "There are some nice beaches near Alexandria," and where we went. We ended our holiday standing on one of the sandy stretches looking at the sea, and then I was taken back to my physical body. In contrast to these higher planes, the dull astral localities seem to have a kind of time in regards to the duration of an activity that is nearer to an earthly state. One remarkable faculty of the spirit body that is soon noticed is the power of telescopic sight. It is quite automatic, like the focus of the physical eye and the desire to see more clearly. If one is interested in a person perhaps 200 yards away, and the personal features and colors of the eyes can be seen, yet the image is not enlarged, nor is the surrounding landscape, as it would be with a telescope. It seems as if a portion of one's own aura projects a surge of inquiry. I think that's what happens, but, it's up for debate. After writing the above, that same night in bed, I projected my spirit helpers as if to emphasize this faculty, gave me an opportunity to exercise it more fully. I was taken to the side of a mountain which overlooked a wide valley. The vibrations were pleasant and uplifting and denoted a higher plane of existence. It was a bright summer's day, and as my sight took in the scene, I noticed miles away 2 figures seated on a grassy knoll. As my interest focused on them, so did the automatic power of the telescopic sight gradually increase, and I saw 2 people seated side by side. I then saw that one was a man, an Indian, very splendidly dressed, and I sensed a prince who was spiritually advanced. His turban and 3/4 length coat were white, and had jeweled decorations, which I knew were earned in spirit. By his side sat a lady with beautiful features and typically Indian, who was also dressed in white, and there was some flimsy silken material draped over one side of her head and face. I knew she was his wife and could even see the small mark on her forehead, which is seen on some Indian women today. There was a path across the valley which went near the grassy bank, and now and again I saw a visitor call on this Indian couple and greet and converse with them for a while. The beauty and serenity of it all stayed with me as I receded from the scene. This was a short projection during the night, and when I returned to my physical body, I realized this was a lesson as well as a privilege. This remarkable faculty, which enables one to see details at such a distance, and in this case, sense the personality without even moving, is like telepathy, quite easy and natural in the spirit world. It seems like the spirit body is like an electrostatic condenser in charge with power. This power is at the disposal of the mind, and in this case, the telescopic sight or telepathy. A fluidic feeler or surge seems to be projected naturally and automatically to wherever the thought is directed. I would agree with that. Meeting my higher self. In my early projections, I used to be taken to lectures, but I could never bring the subject matter back to my physical mind like other experiences. I was told that the lectures were to do with higher knowledge and corresponding wavelength of spirit, and could not be understood or held by the slower physical mind. Keep that in the back of your pockets there when you attend lectures and wonder why you can't remember them. I've been there. I can well accept this, as for instance, no spirit has ever explained in earthly terms how or why prediction is possible. What is learned at the lectures is retained by the spirit mind, because when I entered the lecture room, I used to have a flashback of previous lectures. The remarkable thing about the spirit memory is that the lectures were remembered in sequence, yet the thought was instantaneous. That is the speed of spirit mind. No wonder I only had hazy recollections when I returned. An amusing thing happened at my first lecture. It was a small hall. Blue plush seats arranged in a circular formation. As a new boy, I felt a certain reserve and chose an outer seat, but I had no sooner sat down than I was wafted upwards and deposited in a front seat. The later lectures I attended were more like the usual classroom at school, and at one of these sessions I happened to glance at what I thought was another student beside me when I found I was looking at myself. I was quite interested until I realized that I was admiring myself, and then the two bodies at once reunited. A few weeks later, the same thing happened in the lecture room, but this time the teachers were fully prepared, and my two spirit bodies were kept separated, and I was made to observe fully my other spirit self. I appeared to be a very healthy-looking young man of about 23 with a full head of hair, which in the physical body I lack. This meeting of one's higher self is a very curious phenomenon with far-reaching implications. I have heard of other persons who have experienced astral projections and while in spirit met a separate double of themselves. This shows that the spiritual being of man is also a complicated structure. Wonderful things are demonstrated by some of the advanced ones. I brought back a few recollections of a meeting or lecture I once attended and noticed that my father was in the audience with me. We were shown a map of the sea from Spain to the Gulf of Mexico, but I could not retain what was said about it. There appeared a series of events, like stereoscopic cinema film, my goodness. And I remember seeing a number of strangely dressed horsemen who were suddenly overwhelmed by a tremendous wall of water, like a tidal wave. When I returned to my bed, I could not remember more, but I thought it was connected with some great upheaval like Atlantis. Anyway, some more Frederick. The higher self, encountered it many times myself, as have some of you watching, and it can certainly manifest as a double of you, or an apparent double. Higher self can manifest in any way it chooses, and is very adept at morphing. So if you feel that it's happened to you, and it doesn't take the form that I've hinted at or described here, worry not. Take it for what it is. Accept it. Enjoy it. When I was taking a break, when the first video was uploading, I stood outside of the front door, snacking, and it was raining, and was watching the rain on the trees and bushes splashing on the road, and I was, as they say in the books, suddenly transported, and found myself an earlier version of the me from, I suspect, more than 1,000 years ago, living as a hermit in a mountainside of China, I believe. Very much like the hermits you read about in ancient Chinese poetry. And standing at the front of my cabin, nibbling a breakfast, watching the rain. And I knew very suddenly that in that life I had been visited by extraterrestrial biological entities who were visiting me to see how I was doing, because I had gravitated to Earth from my home planet, of which they were part of, with their full knowledge, and many others had done the same thing. And I believe we were Syrians. I'm never quite sure on that matter, but from Sirius. And it could have been any number of places, it doesn't really matter. Sort of vaguely humanoid in looks. And I was certainly a humanoid looking fellow in ancient China. But it was an interesting thing to plunge into as I stood nibbling on a little bit of yogurt. Here, now. And shows the moving sideways through time, if you like, as opposed to up and down through the spirit planes. And I suspected such was true, but hadn't had a flash like that for quite a long time. And would wish you all similar little transports that will illustrate the wide variety of beings you have been on your way to here. I have certainly written on these matters in my book, You Are History, an examination of the many past lives, or a significant number of them, and their relationship to each other and to higher self, and who gets their share of divinity, as I say. Well, we all get a share, that's for sure. Some more than others, but that's the challenge, to have an incarnation with a little dribble of divinity, and then you feel terribly confused and lost and ignorant and self-critical, because you seem to be bumbling around, not doing very much and getting nowhere. Whereas other areas of your incarnation pattern, I've had a few where you're a relatively enlightened, knowledgeable being who understands the purpose of their existence and tries their best to fulfill it. And there was one, I seem to be sliding sideways into it, a Venetian courtesan, highly educated, quite sophisticated, a high-class call girl, as we would say in modern terms. And it was an incarnation in which I learned a lot. I learned to be the sexual expression of the Divine Mother energy, although those were hardly the terms I used at the time. But it's looking back on it, I do see that now. And you would spend the day or the evening with me and live with me for a while, and I would entertain you and stimulate you in a number of ways and cook for you, and you would pay me handsomely And it was part of being part of the elite. The men that I saw, and a couple of women, were high up in society, and required the services I could provide and could afford them, and enjoyed being with me because I was not uptight, I was not ignorant, I was not imprisoned in, how shall we say, fear of desire. I was free-flowing, and I helped them to be free-flowing, much as sex workers do today on whatever level that they're working on. You know, the higher, the lower. And in a sense, I was teaching them to enjoy themselves and not be narrow-minded, frustrated, angry, you know, whatever. And enjoy the moment for what it was in all its sensual pleasures. And this is what the Divine Mother does for you. And the Divine Mother has many attributes and ways of showing you life outside of struggle. And these reasonably well-off members of the upper classes had their struggles, often to do with jealousy and power struggles within the family. The sister, the mother, the cousin, the uncle, you know, much in the way of elbowing each other out of the way and deceiving each other with clever little plans. These people weren't hungry. They were well dressed, but they had their issues. Some, you know, a whole variety. Some were compassionate and kind. Others were selfish. You know, the whole gamut of emotions and attributes and thoughts. But I do find myself sliding to this personality, this incarnation, on many occasions, and realizing that I learnt as much there as the Druid practitioner, the Egyptian priest, the Buddhist monk, etc., etc. The minor noble in a variety of cultures, the major noble in one culture. But it's all about learning, and you use every position, including the lowly ones, the ones where you're abused, hungry, cast out, etc., etc., or left alone to struggle for yourself through death. They're all learning opportunities. And of course, at the time, you think it's either wonderful or awful, but looking back, you can see how every one of them was a different and useful and story-extending chapter of the big book of your one life, as Alan Watts said a little while ago. So, the Victorian courtesan. She has very graceful movements, and it seems to come naturally to her. She's very comfortable within herself. It could seem as though she was putting on a show, and to a certain extent she is. But as she wafts about her apartments and is having various food and drink brought to her by, it's either a servant or someone who serves several of her companions, When I say companions, I don't mean women that live together in a brothel-like atmosphere. It's a little too classy for that. And but she's very comfortable in her position in society, and is respected, and can have a hold over people that are on the edge of being a threat to her. But she cultivates a warm, giving personality so that nobody really feels like being a threat. And the various bishops and prelates and diplomats that come to see her, some of whom are visiting from other countries, are gratified by her ability to be charming and intelligent. Unlike women of her day, she was quite educated and very au fait with, I would say, European and Middle Eastern politics, Venice being where it was, knowing what was going on in Moscow and Istanbul, etc., etc. A lot of that would be gossip, of course, but still, gossip's very important in the transmission of news and political realities. And the sexual activities would definitely be recognizable to our modern conceptions and practices. She was very comfortable in her role. And would definitely, from time to time, not as often, of course, entertain the wives of some of these men, who would be, left alone for long periods of time. And not feeling in any way troubled or guilty about that. She was a sensual being. Bisexual, I would imagine, although I think her choice was men, her first choice. But I could be wrong. It's my identification with her is not as strong as it could be if I focused on it for weeks at a time. But that seems to be the way, and she does understand. No, sorry, I shouldn't say understand. She understands humanity and its motivations, but she struggles to understand, given the basic Catholic framework of her education and religious ideology. She does struggle to understand God's purpose in all this, and maybe not to understand, but to accept. I would say struggle. It doesn't torture her. She doesn't feel like giving it all up and going into a nunnery. Well, that's a little too late, I suppose. But she arrived in that life with a certain measure of understanding, which was extended by her, her upbringing and her education. And she has not married, of course, and does not have children. And but as you can well imagine, sees some of her regular clients as her children, because they are in great need of her ministrations and her calming effect on them, both sexually and emotionally. And does she feel superior to them? Well, no more than a mother does to a troubled child or a troubled teenager. She understands what they need and she provides it in a measured and sometimes quite generous fashion. And, being a sexual being at ease with herself, she has no troubling issues about her own sexuality. And understands that holding back in order to preserve some kind of inner sanctity is not necessarily the way to go. She gives, and she enjoys giving, and doesn't see the bottom of the well in terms of what is there to give. And that's definitely a lesson that this being learned in that life. The giving. You just keep giving. And without the illusion that you're going to run out of stuff to give. Once you're plugged into the Divine Mother, the gifts are endless. And the notion that you're exhausting that supply turns out to be an illusion. And there were earlier lives when you thought that there was an exhaustion of gifts and had to preserve them, had to hide your treasures. A young and weak spirit, not having brought enough of their own spirit power into incarnation, can suffer from that illusion. You think, oh my God, I'm running out. I have to protect myself. And we often fall prey to that illusion, and I have done myself in several lives. But in that life, I seem to have overcome that illusion. And when I say I, obviously it's a very rubbery, loose term. This whole thing of I is... we use it because it makes language and conversation possible. But understand that it's a very loosey-goosey concept as far as I'm concerned. And I think the more you explore your past lives, and maybe even your future ones, you'll see exactly what I mean. Who you are now is only a detail. An important detail, but still a detail. I see this woman praying from time to time. And is she devout? I don't think she's that devout. She's had sex with too many bishops. But certainly understands or feels comfortable with the act of praying and trying to encompass the many paradoxes and contradictions of her life, the life, trying to bring a consciousness of what God, or what she thinks of as God, would like her to experience. Some kind of harmonious, some kind of understanding that would bring harmony. And I see her doing that from time to time. And in a more humble than devout. How does that sound? Not to deny devotion or the state of being devout, but to balance it with a sense of personal worth and achievement. Kind of, I'm on my way, but I'm not there yet, in her own conceptions. I see her getting old and retiring from service. I see her becoming a hostess and slightly more social functionality. Seems to have enough money that the service trade is no longer necessary. And unfortunately does seem to be getting some of the symptoms of syphilis. I mean, I'm no expert on these matters, but I know it was, went around Europe, and they didn't really know what caused it. They had their suspicions, of course, and she was always very careful to make her visitors wash. There would be a bowl of warm water with, I think, some kind of version of soap in it, in which they would be, their privates would be washed quite carefully. And but I'm not sure if that's enough. But certain precautions were taken, but were not perfect. And she accepts her decline in life, more or less. There's some frustrations, you're not in demand so much anymore, and people are kind to you, but more out of duty than love. Respect is always there, because she maintained her knowledgeable and critical intelligence of matters of state. She did not wield power, but she certainly still advised those who thought they were wielding power, and stayed close. And I thank her for her contribution, even though I'm the visitor here. I'm not really meeting her as I would have met Alan Watts. But I'm projecting into her state of prayer that we've mentioned. And yes, as I suspected, she sees me as some kind of quasi-angelic being that's blessing her. And indeed I am. I bless her for all that she taught me. The me that has evolved to now. The more advanced, more understanding, more embracing being. But her theology and her belief system, she sees me as a sort of a shining being at the edge of her vision, as she prays with eyes closed. And I don't know if she names me as no, I don't think she names me as some kind of biblical reference or anything, but a kindly, blessing kind of presence. And on that note, I shall bid you all farewell.